And thank you so much for your patience. We are very, very excited today to welcome you to this event organized by PeopleStrong. Thank you so much for coming in to join us on this lovely afternoon. For morning, perhaps for some of you, wherever you are. This is Adrian. I'll be your MC for today, and I'm hosting you from the sunny country of Singapore. And today in our masterclass series, we would actually be presenting to you about unlocking growth, the way ahead for HR organization. So we still have many participants coming into this chat. So I would just like to, again, thank you so much for your patience in waiting. And for those of you who are new to People Strong, we'll be sharing with you a bit of what we do later on. And if you have any questions, we'll be happy to address them after this wonderful and our webinar as well. So we will start off in about 20-30 seconds time while we allow some of the final attendees to come in, and I'll be back in a few seconds. Thank you. And I'm right here with you right now. This is Adrian, your MC for today. I'm from People Strong, and I'll be so happy to host you today on our webinar masterclass series regarding unlocking growth, the way ahead for HR organization. Thank you so much for making time this afternoon or morning, wherever you are, in attending this masterclass series. So we'll be very happy today to have two extinguished hosts as well as our guests to share more about what they're going to talk about in today's agenda. For those of you who may be new or not exactly sure of what we'll be covering, essentially we'll be talking about COVID-19. What else will we be talking about? But importantly, it's really looking at the past lessons of what previous crises has taught us, from the Asian financial crisis to .com to SARS. All these different situations has really stretched HR to the limit. But in all these crises, if we do remember, we have actually emerged stronger. But we may have forgotten about them. So we are very happy today to invite our good friend Su-Yen as well as Kiran to help us to understand and recall what actually happened in the past. But most importantly, how did HR evolve back then, and also what you could do to apply those lessons in this current situation to bring ourselves forward. So the key takeaways where we'll be covering today, which hope you will also get a lot of understanding and application from, is to help us challenge long-held assumptions. We look into agility, how to enable organization digitization, how to get comfortable personally with technology, and importantly, how to shape culture to enable all of the above. So before we move on, just a bit of house rule and administration. For logistical efficiency, all attendees will be muted. I understand you will have a lot of questions. You're very excited to ask. I am so sorry. I would have to mute you for efficiency purpose. However, if you have any questions, you'll be able to see a Q&A button at the bottom. Feel free to click on that and key in whatever question you have. There is no house rule on the kind of questions you may ask. If you want to ask whether I'm wearing shorts or not, the question is yes, I'm wearing shorts right now. But other than that, there is no house rule on that. Feel free to ask any questions that you have. We would only be addressing those questions after the main session between Su-Yen and Kiran. So you just hang on to your questions. For those of you who may not have any questions to ask, feel free to check out the box as well. You can upvote any of these questions so that we can prioritize them. If you are facing any issues, any technical issues, please use the chat box to enter those questions in. I have another colleague, Apuva, who will be administering that. So if you have any issue on that note at all, feel free to enter it into the chat box. Along the way, we would actually have a poll to gather some findings throughout this conversation. And also at the end of this event, there will be a survey that we hope you could really help us to fill in. The survey would be a brutal way for us to find out how we have scored in this webinar, whether we're doing well or not. We would really appreciate your help to to help us make the future session much better. And lastly, recording of this session will be shared. We have already started recording. And at the same time, we have actually also shared this event live on Facebook as well as on YouTube. So we're going to get some participant questions from those channels as well, which I will try to share on over this site if possible. So before we start, I'd just like to touch on a bit about PeopleStrong for people who may be unfamiliar. Don't worry, it's not going to be a 20-slide sales deck. It is just about 50 slides. So just bear with me here. So PeopleStrong essentially is in the enterprise HR tech space. We provide the enterprise HR tech suite from hire to retire or hire to fire, depending on the kind of company that you are. So we basically cover a full suite of all this within the HR department. But importantly, the impact is felt throughout the organization. And many customers across Asia, from global Fortune 500 in hospitality, internet business, and also outside of the norm. Like, we work in TrueCorp, we're working with Singapore Life, Institute of Banking and Finance, eBridge, which is better known as Eaton House in Singapore. So we have really carried the PeopleStrong flag around the world right now. But, and I'll just keep it very short. So this will just be the two slides that I'm going to share about PeopleStrong, because the most importantly is really about the content that we have today. But before that, just a quick plug about who I am. I'm the practice leader, Future of Work Tech at PeopleStrong, 15 years in HR. And you may have seen my creation in the Singapore HR Tech Market Map. And today, the event would be hosted by my colleague, as well as my boss, Mr. Kiran Kumar. Kiran is actually the founding member and chief sales officer at PeopleStrong. You may find him very familiar because, yes, he is the same speaker that you have seen in various national forums talking about entrepreneurship, HR tech, analytics, and data. His speech has also been converted or made or repurposed into articles covering all these topics across leading HR and business media. So I would right now hand over the mic across to Kiran to introduce our guest, our esteemed guest today, Ms. Wong Su-Yen. Kiran, over to you.
Thanks, Adrian. I hope you can hear me very clearly. And in this virtual world, I don't know which country are we hosting from. So you said you're hosting from the warm country of Singapore. I'm in the country where there is monsoon coming up from India. So in this virtual world, I think everything is getting merged up. So a very warm good morning and good afternoon to all my friends in India and Southeast Asia. A big warm namaste, because I think that is going to be the official way of greeting each other going forward. So a big warm namaste to all of you in this 5th session of the Masterclass series. First of all, trust everyone is safe and sound with dear and loved ones. That is the most important thing, that is coming out these days. The world is almost coming out of a quarter-long hibernation or lockdown, a circuit breaker, or an enhanced modified quarantine. Whatever name you give, these names have become fancier in this last 3 months, but that is what it is. But as human species, we are not prepared to go into these hibernations, but we were forced in these last 3 to 4 months. So as we step into this new normal, we wanted something absolutely refreshing. And that's where I have got an opportunity to pick brains of a very dear friend, mentor, guide, and official member of the PeopleStrong board, Su-Yen Wong. Su-Yen Wong is the founder and CEO of Bronze Phoenix Limited, ex-CEO of Mercer and HCLI. Along with being on the PeopleStrong board, she is also a non-executive chairperson of the board of NERA Telecommunications, as well as on the independent director at Yoma Strategic Holdings, MediaCorp, and NTUC First Campus. Su-Yen, it's an honor, and thank you so very much for joining us. Su-Yen, I think you're on mute.
Thanks so much for having me, Karen and Adrian. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so Su-Yen, I have a very easy job to do, and you have an equally tough job to do. So, to get away from the monotony of the usual COVID sessions that we used to do, I've started this question on a very different note. So let's start from some historical perspective. The world has seen actually quite a many crises in the past, in the last 3 decades as well. From the Asian financial crisis of 97, the dot-com bust, the 9/11, SARS, and many others that's come along the way. And you have been, Su-Yen, in the midst of a lot of this in various of your capacities. Do you see any similarities? What has been your learnings? What lessons can we borrow from all of this? How can we be better prepared? That's the first tough question for you. So we build up from here to the next question. So over to you, Su-Yen.
Let's start with the complex ones, right? No, I think certainly there's a lot that we can learn from history. And one of my key reflections, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, is number one, how do we learn from the past and use that to anticipate the future? Back during SARS, I was actually based in Hong Kong. And what happened at that point in time was, eventually, and my role required me to travel around the region, working with clients in different locations. Eventually, it came to a point where clients basically said, and many of you remember that Hong Kong was the epicenter of the SARS epidemic. And so eventually clients basically said, don't come, stay, right? We don't want you to show up anymore. And this was still quite early on in the process. And what I realized was, okay, if I wanted to continue engaging with clients, I actually had to move myself to a safe place. And that at that time was Korea. So I actually decamped to Korea, which then allowed me to continue doing the work that I was doing. So one of the things that struck me as we entered COVID-19 early on, even way back in December, reflecting on what I had lived through in SARS, I think it was a pretty short leap to make to come to a conclusion that basically countries were going to be closing their borders. We did not have the capacity to know how severe it would be, but the notion of countries basically saying don't come was one that was quite familiar to me. So I think the first thing is learn from the past and use that to anticipate the future. But I think the second reflection that I've had on this topic is being able to make decisions in absence of perfect information. And that's been the theme throughout this entire last few months. Whether it was looking at, the various things that I'm involved in, and we had to deal with issues like how do we hold our annual general meeting? Do we have that in a physical location as we typically do, or do we move virtual? What will be the local regulations that prohibit or put restrictions around certain gatherings? It was around awards ceremonies, around conferences, a full spectrum of activities that one had to make decisions even now around without perfect information. So I think this is something that we need to get comfortable with. And I would say the last thing is, the last reflection I have on this is that we actually have the capacity and need to be able to adapt and learn from our experience. Winding back further from SARS, in 1997, I was doing a lot of work in Thailand. And as many of you will recall, that's when the Asian financial crisis hit. So at the time, the Thai baht was 25 to the US dollar. But essentially what happened was that the Thai government was unable to have enough foreign reserves to shore up the rate and essentially devalue the currency by loosening the peg to the US dollar. And, at the lowest point, the baht fell to, I think it was 56 or 58 to the US dollar. And as a consequence of that, I think what happened was that economies and the Asian countries that were affected by that put in a lot of measures to protect against something like that happening again. So increased government regulation, tightening of corporate governance rules, restructuring of companies. And consequently, when we reached the global financial crises not too long ago, Asia was actually less affected because it had adapted to and learned from the lessons of the Asian financial crisis. So I would say, 3 points in summary. One is learn from the past to anticipate the future. Recognize that there isn't perfect information, but we actually do have to take some decisions, sometimes ahead of the curve. But we can do that by adapting and learning and getting stronger, as you rightly put it, Karen, so that we can build up our resilience for future exigencies.
Sure, thanks, Su-Yen. But I go to the next question, and I'll try to make this slightly tougher. So it really makes sense, to learn from these three. But this one looks like has been absolutely been unprecedented. I mean, nobody saw this coming.
Yep.
Uh, Even if somebody saw this coming, nobody saw the magnitude of this. So it's almost changing, the base paradigm, which we had taken for granted for such a long time. And a few months ago, and you and me have chatted. We used to talk about future of work in a very different way. Uh, with all this changing and it almost becoming like a tsunami of sorts, where it has really taken away anyone's advantage. It has brought everyone to the same ground. Do you think all of that is still relevant, or are people redrawing the maps all over? I mean, sometimes when you come down to basics, you really are not worried about the future of work, right? You're mostly thinking about the present. So, what do you think? What's changing on that front? So, zooming in from the global points directly into the work and the HR space. So, that's the second question.
Yeah, I think in many respects, the future of work is here now. We were moving in that particular direction, but if anything, this pandemic has caused is an acceleration in that direction. So let's take a couple of examples. Let's look at work from home, right? I mean, penetration of work from home has been varied across many different markets, and there have been all kinds of reasons against that. For example, we don't have the technology infrastructure. It's not part of the culture of how we do things. Our leaders aren't comfortable with their teams being remote. There's a long list of reasons why it hasn't had the same level of adoption across different geographies. Well, in one fell swoop, we figured it out because we had to. And so in many ways, I think it really accelerated the future of work. I would put in another dimension on that, which is around automation and robotics. One of the aspects I think that this pandemic has laid bare is that it's not just COVID-19, but in the future, there will be other situations which will cause us perhaps to behave in ways that in the past we didn't have to worry about. So you mentioned sort of namaste being the default greeting because we're now concerned about transmission of germs and viruses and all sorts of other things. So is there a possibility where we get to a point where we'll actually trust robots in certain circumstances to actually do the tasks that currently people are doing? Now, it's been moving in that direction. Last few years, companies have been testing drones for package delivery, for example. Well, drones are the essence of contactless delivery, right? So I would argue that the future of work has accelerated. This path towards the future of work has in fact accelerated, and it becomes incumbent on HR in each organization to figure out how that interfaces with the people and the work that needs to get done. So it's everything from looking at all the different jobs that we have in an organization, disaggregating them into what are the parts that are essentially human, that really require human touch, and what are those jobs on the other hand that machines can and should do better than humans, given this new paradigm, as you rightly put it, and really start pulling apart how we look at how work is done. So that's one example of, I think, how it really hits the organization. But that also requires, I think, a level of comfort with technology that from an HR perspective, we really need to come to grips with. It used to be, there's a joke that anything that has electricity, well, that's IT's job, that's the technology department's job. Well, it's a little bit like now everybody needs to know certain fundamentals around how technology affects the business and how it can drive the business. So I think this has also been a very rapid tutorial in coming up to speed with how we actually embed technology into our workflows, into our organizations. So I think the future of work is now.
I like the word. It's a rapid tutorial. You're right. So let me just give you an example. We wrote ourselves a letter from 2028. This was just an year ago, thinking that would be a good foreseeable time that we can look in future. And believe you me, I think whatever we wrote in that letter 2028, that's happening in 2020. And we've seen a massive of and a lot of our viewers, customers, potential customers have a view to that letter that we wrote from 2028. And yeah, and it is just absolutely happening on that front, yeah, as we speak today. And in the last 3 months, it is just accelerated like anything. I mean, can you beat that? We've been able to get people move on to continuous performance management in flat 2 weeks. So if performance management as a product was to be implemented, usually took about a quarter. You had to have that data. You need to create those workflows. It was not just us. The way the customers stood with us in doing that change, we are surprised by the fact that how human psychology reacts to a pressure situation like this. So it's a rapid tutorial. You don't have 3-4 years to figure it out. So learn it right now. And on the other product, which is Zippy Achieve, a lot of our customers would have heard about. We saw an unprecedented count on that number. So we had about 21 million messages that were exchanged. I think, I don't know the numbers, but how much WhatsApp would be exchanging. But imagine we became the de facto communication platform for a lot many organizations. And not just communication, by the way, because there are other mediums to do it, including Teams and emails. We saw some 400,000 tasks being created. So people now, when they got settled, into the work from home scenario, I think the most important thing for them was, how do I collaborate better? I can't see them, but I can definitely have a very directed set of conversations. And we were able to see a 25% increase in the execution velocity. We ran some surveys, we got that some of that data. But all of this, we thought, will evolve itself in the next 2 to 3 years. But this has happened in this quarter. So there has been a great discovery of sorts. And it is, I think, I like the word rapid tutorial. I think all of us, including us as PeopleStrong, have gone through a rapid tutorial in the last 2 to 3 months or so. And it's completely changing. And single product modules are in high demand. So people want, can I give learning to people in just flat 7 days? Can I do a real-time exchange? I don't want to do that on a third-party app. Can I, on real-time, measure their performance on a continuous performance basis? So those are some of the things that we have seen, and that was my bit on the rapid tutorial part. I'll slightly go on to a different tangent, Su-Yen, and I would not have asked this question to anyone else, but you are there, and I did not want to leave that chance, right? So the change that we're all going through is very granular. I would go a level below. It is very cellular, actually. Whether it is work from home or Teams meeting or adjusting to the new normal. But somebody misses out the element of how the mental well-being element has been taken care of, because all of this is converged at a very rapid rate. And equate that with the element of that you have to be isolated. Even if you are with your families, you're isolated in your own small set. And human being is a social animal. That's what we were taught in all these while, right? Now, when we miss that aspect, there is a very big point of mental well-being that gets missed out. In fact, it only affects about 1 or 2% of the population, but there are 98% of the population who don't have a clue how to deal with it. And I have seen you promoting a couple of initiatives on the Caregiver Alliance and some deep work that you do. Can you please shed some light on it? And what essentially can HR do in this? Because I think everybody's going to miss it. Sales teams are going to miss it. Business teams are going to miss it. Administration, finance, the CEO has a lot of responsibilities to take care of the company. But I think there is a lot that the HR department in the new world can really do on this aspect. So would love to hear, definitely on this part, and what can productivity or performance or anything of those sorts, can really go along in this kind of a sense? So tougher question.
Yeah, great question, Karen. So, if I step back and I say, what is the purpose of HR? What's HR in the business of doing? HR is there to help drive performance of the organization. We all know that. However, if what we're seeing from individuals is that they're having mental health challenges, that is clearly going to affect their performance. Therefore, it's absolutely part of the language that I think HR increasingly needs to speak, which is getting educated around mental health issues. We're getting pretty good at physical health challenges, whether it's disabilities, because they're a little bit more, you can see visually if somebody has a challenge there. But mental health is very often hidden. And it's not just that HR needs to deal with it. HR needs to, as everything else, equip the organization with the capability of dealing with this. So how do you equip your leaders to have the kind of conversations, to look out for warning signals, warning signs from their team members, from somebody that may be having a challenge? It could be at home, could be in their work, could be work stress, it could be a whole suite of different reasons. But if anything, I believe that for this period of working from home has really brought into sharp focus the fact that people are holistic individuals. It's not that they come to work, they're one person, they go home, there's something else. They're integrated. And when we see them in their home settings with the dog walking by, or, the child knocking on the door, maybe sometimes not knocking, and we recognize that people have whole lives. And so as leaders and as organizations, how do we recognize that people bring their whole self to work, and when there are challenges in any particular dimension, ensure that they're being addressed so that they can perform in the way that we need them to for the organization's outcome. And I think, to your point, one of the of people being human beings being social creatures, if you have a puppy, for example, and the puppy doesn't get socialized from young, that puppy grows up into not a very well-functioning dog. So in the same way, even though we may be remote, and there's a lot of discussion around how much of remote working is going to continue, and I think currently, as it stands, there's quite a strong consensus that actually it can work, does work, so some portion of work will continue to be remote. How do you continue to build those human connection links? And how do you ensure that whilst people are remote, you can still bring them together to communicate using technology as a platform, but also to build the culture of the organization? So I think this just ups the stake for HR, because now we don't only have to worry about what happens in the office environment. We need to worry about this very abstract way of bringing people together so that they can do their best work. And this time of working from home has been tough for some individuals, particularly people who have been on their own, for example. If you're surrounded at least by some components of your family, that's great. But there are people who are on their own, and in some situations, it's led to some not very good outcomes. So again, in the spirit of looking at people as whole beings and recognizing the impact that mental health has on an individual's performance, I think this is a whole area that HR is going to have to get another rapid tutorial on. So if it weren't enough to learn more about technology and digitization, we also now need to learn about a little bit more about sort of what drives human performance.
Thank you. I think I'll share a couple of examples as well, Su-Yen. So what we have done is on the PeopleStrong tech platform, we are also on one side a platform as a service as well. What that means is we can get in services like a doctor at call kind of a service right from the application, right? And so a lot of our customers came out asking for that. And we were able to, because we have adoption rates at about 98% on our technology platform. So it was easy for us to direct those employees who wanted some kind of an attention to a third party application which was integrated through the system. Uh, what we are trying to do on that, as we move forward and as we proceed forward, I feel that health parameter is also going to be a very important data element that organizations would have to start measuring, if this is going to be the new norm, right? So if you look at factories, back in the days, health was given a very important, element. I mean, large factories even had hospitals and almost all of the support ecosystem within that zone. I think a lot of that is going to come back, and a lot of that is going to come back through technology, because we're going to be one large scattered segment of people who and work from home is going to be the new norm anyway. I think that is going to any which way change on that. So I think it's a very large topic, but I felt it was a very important element as we come out of these COVID times. So
Yeah.
let me quickly, sorry.
And I may just also add that, of course, there's a very broad spectrum of jobs and types of work that people do. So on the one hand, we've been talking, I think, with a bit of implied assumption around knowledge workers, where work can happen in their homes, for example. But of course, equally, I think it's also important to touch on the people who have actually had to be the arms and legs who actually, ensure that that the rest of life is flowing. Whether it's the nurses, the doctors on the front line, the people who are helping us make sure that that our garbage gets collected, that food gets delivered, and ensuring that the food supply chain works. So those jobs are very different, but equally susceptible to a very high degree of mental stress as well. And so therefore, I think from an HR perspective, the lens through which we look at mental health is obviously going to differ depending on the nature and structure of the organization, the types of roles that we have within that. But equally, I believe everyone's impacted by this very rapid shift in the way things are done.
Oh, I agree. I agree. Absolutely. I think, thank you so very much for pointing that out. And so, on that note, I swing by on my fourth question. And, this is so most of us who've joined us on this group, Su-Yen, is our larger community in Southeast Asia as a geography. And, there are a lot of similarities. So, we are definitely, very distributed geographically, but I think there are a lot of similar chords that tie all of us together, including demographics, the way people access technology, the age segment that we are all in, and all of that. So, including countries like Thailand, Singapore, Philippines, they're all on a cusp of an explosive growth. That's another common thing that is tying all of them together. Do you think the time has come that Southeast Asia would now be the next superpower? Has the pendulum got shifted? Are we going to be the new headquarters for the world? I mean, both developing and developed countries, there is no difference. I think the way, all this is affected. So
Yeah.
can we be the next new big headquarters for the world? Is the
Yeah.
fourth.
So leaving geopolitics aside, because there's a lot happening on that front as well, I think if we look at the underlying drivers of what enables growth, you touched on a few of them: emerging middle class, the favorable demographics, increasing urbanization, leapfrogging into digital or leapfrogging technologies in many cases. The ingredients are all there for Southeast Asia to grow in terms of its impact and share of any dimension that we look at. So it's everything from share of GDP, share of growth, but equally in other areas, even things like influence from a cultural perspective, right? So I think one of the things that I've always found interesting about Southeast Asia is how rapidly some of these countries can change. And I just want to use one example because I think it's quite an extreme illustration of the opportunity in Southeast Asia. So we all know that Myanmar was a closed economy for a very, very long time. And, back in the year 2000, which was, okay, some time ago, but not too long ago, the cost of a SIM card was $5,000. Okay, now obviously that put it out of reach for just about everyone. I think by around 2013, the cost of that same SIM card, or actually a better SIM card, fell to about $150. And today, a SIM card in Myanmar costs around $2. Which has resulted in, a very rapid, again, growth of the economy, where you have mobile penetration rates, in 2018, it was something like 80%, which at the time, I don't have the latest statistics, was higher than the US at 77% and Germany at 78%. So not a very well-known statistic. But this has then enabled a whole host of other services to be realized. So if you take the financial system and banking, for example, something like 5% of the population has a relationship with the traditional banking system. And in the entire country of Myanmar, there is something like 2,000 to 3,000 bank branches and ATMs. But as a consequence of leapfrogging technology, so not having to worry about first generation, second generation, third generation, we're jumping straight to where we are now. You see the adoption of mobile money gaining traction at an unimaginable pace. So if you compare traditional banking and you look at somebody like a Wave Money that has over 50,000, I think it's getting close to 60,000 agents around the entire country, you start to see what is possible in Southeast Asia. And I use that as an example because Southeast Asia is as you mentioned, a very diverse set of countries. You have huge urban centers like the Bangkok, Jakarta, Manila, Singapore, so forth, but you also still have a large portion of people, the population, that's also outside of those areas. And with the technology that we're talking about, there is the possibility of driving further growth and bringing all of those people along into the growth opportunities. So to your question, opportunities in Southeast Asia, absolutely abundant. And I am a huge believer that, one of the things that will be, a huge promise for Southeast Asia, and we're seeing this already, is in its human capital. Again, efforts vary from country to country, and depending on where you happen to be sitting today, which country you're in, you might feel more positively or negatively about what your government's doing in education, for example. But net on balance, I think the region has made tremendous strides in terms of education of its population, building in the mobile infrastructure that has enabled the kinds of developments that I was just describing a minute ago. And those are the kinds of ingredients that we look to in terms of future growth opportunities.
Awesome. This depth of information is the reason why you are the first person I come to, whenever there is a question knocking. And, let me just share you as well. When we were, a lot of customers that I speak to, till 3 months back, I'm a caged bird now. But before that, I was almost in front of every customer every almost day. And I think there was a very, strong response that we used to get from people saying that, okay, you know what, Southeast Asia would require a product that has to be grown within, has to be born within, to really understand the elements of it, right? And, for a long time, I did not even understand what that meant. And, when I try comparing some of the elements of demographics, what I realized was that, in a European continent, and I'm not trying to politicize this, but if the average age is about 47, and if the average age in Southeast Asia is about 24, 25, there is a huge difference on how you will design products and technology for the new age consumer. And I think, and that rings a bell, when I hear this from our potential customers. And thanks for all the advice, by the way, not just on this answer, but all the advice that you've given me, at least so far. So thanks for detailing out. So maybe a minute more I'll just spend. If you look at on the slide, Su-Yen, on the enterprise in the mid-market, and this is mostly Southeast Asia predominantly, payroll, core HR, so somebody who's greater than 2,500 employees, workforce management, payroll, and core HR were the biggest components that they were trying to look at. And organizations below 2,500, they said they would want to focus on the core HR part of it, including the recruitment part of it as well. So that's how the things, got shifted. And you've been privy to, a lot of our demos, and you've seen the product at our end. I think some of our great focus areas are on these platforms. So thank you so very much for giving a very elaborate answer on that. I really appreciate that. I'll make it easy for you now. Okay. This is the last question. And I definitely want to end this on a positive note, right? So, even the smallest challenges, Su-Yen, can be overwhelming for people. And sometimes even the largest of the challenges can be crossed easily, if we have the right mindset and are fearless to challenge the conventional ways of doing things, right? Um, I don't know if I can ever mirror you, but I have seen you from very great distance of you prepping yourself to conquer the tallest peak of Mount Everest. And you've been always humble enough to say that, okay, you will only reach to a particular point, but that is also unconventional for a lot of us who are on this group, right? So tell us, how do you, I mean, to do certain things. I heard the other day you have climbed 240 floors. I can't just even imagine. So how do you challenge that conventional thing, and how is it that we can apply some of those things in our lives? So that's my final question, to end that on a very positive note, because there is that a huge amount of positivity that is required right now.
Yeah, so maybe just to give a little bit of context around this, about a year and a half ago, my husband came back and said, there is this charity that's trying to raise awareness and funds for mental health. And part of that involves, bringing a group of people who are willing to attempt to get to Everest Base Camp. What do you think? Now, I have to clarify that I'm not a particularly mountain person. I'm actually deathly afraid of falling off the edge of a mountain. So I'm not really a mountain person. But as we discussed earlier, mental health is an issue that resonates very strongly with me. And I figured, okay, I have a year to prepare. I say yes first, right? And then figure out how to get it done. So we signed up for this, and essentially over the past year and a half, I've been training to get to Everest Base Camp. This is from somebody, if you meet or speak to people that I've known in earlier parts of my life, they would kind of go, huh, she's doing what? But, as you rightly put it, we're at a stage now, I think, where, we feel in much stronger position to be able to do this. Fitness levels, health levels have increased. And what I've learned from this process is really that consistency matters. And that has probably been the biggest takeaway. It doesn't matter where your starting point is, whether it's something physical that you're trying to conquer, or maybe it's something that you're trying to do in your organization to drive change. It really isn't about me going out and sprinting the very first day. What has made the difference is keeping to a regimen, and rain or shine, just keep at it. And over time, seeing the progress and the results. The needle doesn't move in a day or a week. Sometimes even in a month, I kind of go, oh my goodness, I've been at this at a month and it's still, I don't seem to be making much progress. But over the course of a sustained period of time, the needle does absolutely move. And so I would say that, that's probably a reflection that I now take into everything that I do, which is just start somewhere. Start small, start slow, keep up with it, and over the course of a period of time, you will see the results, either for yourself personally, for something that you're trying to do, or for your team, or for your organization. So that's my 2 cents.
No, absolutely. I read somewhere you wrote very recently. I think consistency is the most underrated virtue, and I think uh, it struck a very deep chord in me, right? So I'm trying to do my level bit, of saying that, okay, can I walk 5 kilometers today, or can I take that to 6 kilometers every day? I'm still too far away from those 240 stair climbs, or even the Everest base camp. But I think that statement has struck a very deep chord. So on that note, thank you so very much. Yes.
Let's keep it up. Yeah.
Yeah, just keep it up.
Yeah.
So thank you so very much. I think I thoroughly enjoyed these 45 minutes. So Adrian, if I could have had another 1 hour, I could have gone on. But I know that you've come back on the screen telling me to shut up. So
Here,
really,
it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
absolutely. I think there are the last 15 minutes, Su-Yen, I think there are some questions by the participants as well. Adrian will be facilitating that. So yeah, I think we both can try.
Here, let's hear them.
Adrian, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kiran, and thank you so much, Su-Yen, for making today's session so insightful. As I was listening through to this very interesting conversation, the survey that came out in the Sunday Times or the Straits Times recently really boggles me again. For those of you who may not be aware, in Sunday Times, or is it Straits Times, I really can't recall, there was a survey of 1,000 respondents on what, in your opinion, would be the top 5 non-essential job right now, and HR manager is ranked number 5. So that really got all of us going. And I was just wondering how the HR manager at SPH, the parent company of Straits Times, will be feeling when she read the report. In any case, I think with today's session, we came to realize that HR is really beyond that. If only the respondents of that survey would have a chance to review this webinar. But if you are one of them, don't worry, if you have missed any part, we'll be sending the recording to you shortly after the event. But before I take up any more precious time on the Q&A, I'd like to move straight into it. We've been taking questions left, right, center in the Q&A, in the chat box. We also have some on the Facebook live chat. So I'll just try to highlight some of those which I feel may be a bit more interesting and aligned to our conversation here. But let me just take a look at what we have over on the chat box right now. So someone's asking, in fact, this question came in just recently on the future of work, which is right now. What are the 3 key things you would advocate to embrace the disruptive shifts to come up to the new normal on top? And that question is directed to Su-Yen, but Kiran, if you have anything to share, feel free to join in.
So what are the 3 imperatives to come out on top in the future of work? If I just paraphrase that.
That's correct.
So I think one of the aspects that to me is really important is how do you build an enabling culture? So when we talked about the amount of change that confronts an organization, I think, and this has nothing to do with working from home or remote or any of that, it just has to do with how an organization has the agility to move quickly. And that requires a kind of culture that has the ability to move fast, adapt, pivot. So that's the first thing, is how do you build a culture that enables that? Second, I would say, is how do we ensure that organizations and individuals become really focused on learning and reinventing themselves? We've seen this at an organization level. Clearly, business models change all the time. We're now, it's very common to not be doing 5-year plans. You're doing 3-year plans. Some companies are doing 1-year plans. So the pace of change is really quick in terms of reinvention. But how do you ensure that the people in the organization are switching at a similar rate? We're all guilty of this. We want to hire people who have the skill sets to do the job today. But if your business model is going to be changing in 12 to 24 months, I think a much more fundamental characteristic is how do we ensure that we help people make those shifts and to ensure that they have the mindsets to be able to learn from being an expert in area A to an expert to area B. And so then the third aspect, besides culture as well as learning, I would say is around how do we build the right kind of mindset, which I touched on a little bit. So, I think that has to do with leaders, role modeling, the kind of mindset they want, but also equally among individuals. We've all probably had situations where, you offer somebody a great opportunity, but they don't have the right mindset to take it on. And they say, oh, no, I'm very happy doing what I'm doing. I'm very comfortable doing what I'm doing. But those are the things that eventually will kill careers and kill organizations, right? So to really thrive in the future of work, I do think it's really important to foster those kinds of mindsets. If you're lucky, you bring in people that already have those mindsets. But, if they don't, then as an organization, you have to do something to foster and create those kinds of ways of thinking.
I'll just, Adrian, just add one more point, and we've been dwelling on this as well. And the one only point that I would want to add is that how comfortable we become in becoming digitally native. Because gone are those times when they will, when you will say that, okay, let me give you, let me buy a software, which is supposed to just get all the data together and stuff like that, right? I do this for a living day in, day out, and I meet with customers. I think they have to become comfortable in becoming digitally native, and they have to take the employees along with them, which almost means that consumerize the HR technology platform. If your users are not using it, that means there is something fundamentally wrong in the way you're trying to, evolve into a next orbit. So that's my 1 cent on to what just Su-Yen said. So become digitally native. That is going to be very important. It's a very easy statement, but you have to go deep dive and work along with your employees who are your consumers now, and make a consumer-facing technology product in HR.
Thank you so much, Kiran. And I think this really draws back to what Su-Yen mentioned at the closing, which is really on the mindset. And it requires a lot of huge change in people in trying to cope up or catch up with what is going on, the amount of changes out there. And this really would be a good segue to a couple of questions, which is related to mental wellness, something that we actually discussed earlier on. So on one hand, we are seeing mental wellness, especially with the younger workforce. How do we ensure that this is being addressed? And how do you communicate this well? And which also lead us to another question by another attendee on the responsibility of mental health of employees. Is it the leaders? Is it HR? How do we tackle this as an organization or as an individual?
So maybe let me start with the second one. So in terms of whose responsibility it is, like everything else, I think, responsibility lies with everyone. Like you can't say that, it's the HR department's responsibility. So, HR go and solve this problem. Leaders absolutely are the front line in this particular example, because they're working with their teams day in and day out. And they should be the ones who can actually spot if there's an issue. Equally, I also would say that individuals have a responsibility for their own mental well-being as well. So it's also about getting educated about what the signs and signals are, and asking for help when help is warranted. So it's not just where should this bucket fall, but actually I think we all collectively play a part in ensuring the mental health. The first question was around how do we ensure mental well-being of employees. And I think for that one of the things that I am seeing is an increased focus on teaming. And why do I say that? It's because when you think about how a lot of performance management structures have been in place, a lot of it has traditionally been very individualistic. We've all got our bell curves, and you can say, X% on this end and Y% on the other end. And that sometimes can lead to a lot of pressure on people to outperform their neighbor. And that's where a lot of the mental health, mental well-being issues start. And if you take it out of the workforce and you bring it into education, for example, if you have a hyper-competitive education system, you start seeing the effects of mental wellness or the lack thereof in students and children as young as teenagers, because they basically are trying to compete against somebody else as opposed to competing against themselves. So if you look in the organization construct, I think one of the realities is that work is now much more complex and requires a lot more interdependency, which is why you're seeing a lot of work being done in teams. So the question then becomes, how do we put in place the right measurement systems to reward performance that truly reflects what is essentially a very interwoven system, so that people don't feel that it's them, trying to solve, the problems on their own, but actually they're working together with a unit, and that unit collectively can achieve the goals that have been set for the organization. I actually believe that will actually have some bearing on how individuals think about, for individuals' mental well-being.
And just to add on to Suyen, what the point that you spoke about performance, I think if we get the right metrics and if we have a habit to measure that, I think a lot of this can be detected much earlier as well. So for an example, productivity, we speak a lot about it, but it is not getting measured at the core, right? So if productivity measures can be merged with some health data or some leave parameters or the way people are interacting, I think that will start giving HR signs, very early warning signals that there is a problem. Now, there is only one dimension to solve the problem today, which is to say, fix it for the company. But the equal dimension that needs to be fixed is what is it that we're doing for that particular individual as well? Can we really help them to come up that particular curve? It's an again easier said than done. But I think if HR and having said that, I saw that question as well. It is not that HR alone can do, but HR can actually bring in technology agents, can actually create a framework by which this can be detected, and they can very much involve their leadership to really focus on this. So
Yeah, and coming back to the whole COVID situation, which is where we started this entire conversation around, I do feel that one of the outcomes has been, a fair amount of reflection on the part of organizations, leaders, and individuals around, what do we want the world and our organizations and leaders to be like going forward? Is it just about going back to what things were before, or can we use this as a way to hit pause and to re-look at how intertwined everybody and everything is? And so when you look at it in that context, I do feel that many organizations are taking a look, and there's some very notable ones globally who have basically said, look, we need to think about sustainability of the organization, sustainability of the environment, sustainability of our people in all kinds of dimensions, which means that it's the metrics by which even we judge an organization need to be multidimensional. It's not only about your revenue and your profit growth. Yes, that's important, absolutely, but there are other aspects that need to be baked into that as well. And so, I think, we've all seen organizations that are very unidimensional in terms of the metrics, and sometimes those are the most toxic environments. So, I think if we're trying to move away from that as a consequence of perhaps learning something from this pandemic, it may be to have a more balanced and holistic way of measuring our organization and individual performance.
right.
Thank you so much. So further to this topic, which is really, really interesting, another question also came up. And I think this is really addressing on the individual level, because right now with COVID-19, everyone working remotely, the boundaries has blurred between work and personal life. I mean, the first few days when I was working remotely, I did not realize I am still working until dinner time, and my wife has to chase me away from the dining table. So how would you be able to share any of your personal tips or guides on employees who's trying to strike a better balance between work and personal life, which are so blur right now and overlap so much? Do you, in your personal observation, in your personal capacity, how do you try to strike that balance?
Kieran, you want to go first?
I'm trying to learn that myself as well. I think it is important. Uh, how do we stick to the same? Nothing's changed, by the way. What has changed when you're working from home or working from office, at least from a work perspective, right? The home is a different dimension, which continues to be a constant. So can we treat work from home like work from office, which means create that boundaries which are very important, and that boundaries could be mental boundaries or it could be physical boundaries as well. In your mind, make it very clear that you will work from this time to this time, and and you will be able to give that kind of a time to the family as well. In these last 3 months, definitely things have been really out of control because we don't have any kind of a support, and the whole lockdown has happened. I hope that is not going to be the future, if that is going to be the future. But I think it is really demarcating that, okay, this is the life that I would want to live. And in that life, can I, and borrowing one point from Su-Yen, It is about, can you consistently improve yourself? If you took some to do a job in 3 hours on one day, can you figure out, is there a better efficient way to do this? Because if I'm not really discovering that, what that means is, I can continue working in an inefficient way and then still keep cribbing about it. So I'm not trying to really become a preacher here, but I think these two things have really helped me, at least, to say that, okay, I will start, I'll end. I do get on calls, definitely, but I close on my laptop for sure that I'm not working. And one thing that I've borrowed from Su-Yen, I'm at least walking 6 kilometers every day. And I'm trying to improve that, right? So those are some couple of parameters I'm keeping. And keep those couple of parameters, try measuring it. It may help you improve. A wiser point maybe from you, Su-Yen.
No, I actually really agree with what you were saying, Karen. For me, what I have found valuable is to block out certain times that are for focused attention or focused work. It's a little bit easier, I think, when you're in your home situation to be distracted by certain things. So, if you're able to sort of say, okay, I'm going to spend this time to this time really focusing on focus work, get through that. For me, it's earlier in the day. For you, it might be something else, because I think everyone works differently. That has been something that has helped me not just stay sane, but I think push through from a productivity perspective. The other thing that I would say also is that I don't think there's any one way to do this. Everybody's situation is a little bit different, and it depends both on your the number of people that you may have in your home, the physical setup of your home, the technology setup of your home. There are all sorts of factors that might make this different for everybody. But for me, carving out a space has been good. The other thing I would say is, have some clarity around priorities. And by priorities, I look at this at a few different levels. So on one level, it is priorities of work that needs to get done. So, we all usually have long lists of things that need to get done. But, what are the priorities that we want to focus on in any particular day or period of time? But also, then I would say priorities in terms of non-work, precisely because all of these areas are blending together. So Kieran, you've clearly put as a priority going to go walk 6 kilometers a day. So that's a priority, and just carve out the time to do that. You might have priority that says, okay, we're going to have family time. That is a particular time, and that's a priority, and you carve out that time. So I think being clear on what's important actually is a really good guidepost for me in terms of how then I can allocate and spend my time.
Thank you so much, Su-Yen. And due to limitation of time, as if I'm looking at the clock right now, it's 3:03. Time passes so fast when the conversation is interesting. But I'd like to just squeeze out a few more minutes for us to grab this last question, which came in, and I find this to be quite interesting. This just came in and is asking, how do we avoid the culture or impression of micromanaging employees, especially for those that are not used to work from home setup or remote work setup? I've been hearing this quite a fair bit. Companies, I even heard stories of companies mandating employees to turn on Zoom 24/7 so that they can spy and see what's going on. I'm not sure exactly just what they want to look at, but let's try to hear your take on this. So how would company be able to manage this and do this well, where they wouldn't freak out their employees in any way?
So from my perspective, and Karen, I'm sure we'll have other things to add, it really comes down to being clear on what kind of outcome and output is required. This doesn't actually require working from home. Even prior to working from home, if the organization is an outcome-driven one, then we're not measuring the inputs, we're measuring the outputs. And did you get to your deliverable when you said you did it in the way that you said you would? In which case, we're just trying to measure, did that happen? I think the danger with sort of for use the example of having Zoom on 24 hours a day, micromanaging, is that just because somebody is sitting in front of the computer doesn't mean that they're being productive, right? So you want to measure the results, not the inputs. I would also say, so come back to one of the earlier points I made, which is around the culture to enable performance is, trust, I think, is becoming an increasingly valued trait. Both directions. Trust must be given, trust must also be earned. And so obviously, if there's somebody who violates that trust, then you're going to spend a little bit more time sort of, ensuring that, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is followed. But if you have a culture where it's about its integrity of, we do what we say we're going to do when we say we're going to do it, then, I think it's much more likely that you'll have the kind of positive outcome. I will also say that many managers and leaders have a challenge with this because they're not necessarily very good at scoping the desired outcomes. It is much easier to just kind of wave your hands in the air and kind of go say, go do this thing. And then the poor person is like, well, what on earth is this thing? What is it I'm trying to do? So if you're unclear about what the outcomes are to begin with, then you can't really expect people to deliver against those outcomes. So there is an onus on leaders to be much clearer about the desired outcomes as well. And then equally on employees or team members to ensure that they deliver against that. Ask questions if you're not sure what's expected, right? So get all that clarified up front, because that then builds trust.
Got it. And Kiran, from a technology standpoint, is there anything companies can look at to better measure performance, better measure outcome?
I think, the straight answer to that question is use all performance, combine it with Zippy Achieve. I think you can do a significantly more number of things. I think what is more important with, at a conceptual level, if I can just add on, is the fact that performance is only aligned to an organization. For an individual to start getting connected to it, there has been a missing link, that has not been served for a very long time. And that, I believe, are activities or tasks. So individuals assign themselves to tasks, and somewhere if that can be connected to the larger goals of it, I think that is what is going to be the big game changer. And I think the all performance and Zippy Achieve combination is definitely a place to look out for. At least that is what has changed from the game from an adoption perspective recently. Easier answer for me.
Thank you so much, Kiran. And I'd like to thank all the questions that have come in, and a huge thanks to our guest, Su-Yen, as well as our host, Kiran. We have arrived at the end of our session here. Again, thank you so much for going through this session with you. I personally learned a lot of stuff. I hope you do as well. And after this session, you'll be brought across to a survey. Appreciate your help to fill that in. Otherwise, just keep a lookout in your email inbox. You will be receiving a recording of this session very, very soon. So again, I'd like to thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Su-Yen. Thank you, Kiran, for this lovely session. And we hope to see everyone here again. Thank you so much. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Kiran.
Bye.